How does the US military name its tanks, jets, and ships? Falcon, Patriot, Abrams. The names of America's mini war machines appear to be smashed together with no rhyme or reason, but there's a method to the Pentagon's madness most of the time. If the US Army followed its own regulations, we would have heard about how Ukraine's donated Black Widow surface-to-air missiles shot down a Russian Kinzhal hypersonic cruise missile last year over Kyiv. Instead, this act was performed by Ukraine's Patriot missile batteries. The guidelines for naming Army air defense assets officially prescribe venomous reptiles, spiders, and insects for missiles. Even the Air Force named one of their air-to-air missiles the Sidewinder, after the venomous snake. But in the case of the Patriot, the missile system was named by Army Major General Charles Means, who was running the Patriot missile program during its development. In that particular case, General Means' preference trumped official Army regulations. In the Army's aviation world, they've stuck to a consistent naming convention. For instance, Army helicopters are named after Native American tribes: the Black Hawk, the Apache, and the Kiowa. Oh, and the Comanche program that never took off. For tracked armored vehicles, the Army is fond of naming tanks after famous Army generals from the past. Ukraine's Bradleys are named after World War II hero General Omar Bradley. The Abrams tank is named after General Abrams, a former commander in Vietnam. Actually, individual armored soldiers will name their Abrams tanks whatever they want. Thunder Road or something. Kind of like the way I've named every Corvette I've ever owned after pirate ships. This is the Queen Anne's Revenge. Fighter jets in the Air Force are named after birds of prey. The F-15 Eagle, the F-16 Falcon, and the F-22 Raptor. Actually, if we're being technical, and I'm always technical, a raptor is not a bird itself, but it's a class of birds of prey that include eagles, hawks, and falcons. The word raptor comes from Latin word rapere, which means to seize or grasp, which makes sense because the F-22 is an interceptor. Air Force jets that have a ground attack mission profile are named after, well, things that could kill you from the sky, like the F-35 Lightning and the A-10 Thunderbolt. Can you be killed by a Thunderbolt? Maybe if it's so loud that it puts you into cardiac arrest, but don't tell the Air Force. The US Navy's ships are particularly confusing. Currently, SSN, fast attack boats, and SSBNs, boomers, are switching places with respect to the naming convention. Virginia-class SSNs are named for states, whereas the new Columbia-class SSBNs will be named for cities. This is a reversal from the 70s when Los Angeles-class SSNs were named for cities and Ohio-class SSBNs were named for states. The term boomer itself comes from the Latin word fa boom mer, which is derived from the acronym FBM for Fleet Ballistic Missile Submarine. Fun fact, US Navy attack submarines used to be named after fish. Right now, there is a Gato-class submarine from World War II parked in Lake Michigan called the USS Silversides. Heck, you can even spend the night on it if you want. Seriously, if you're ever in Michigan, look up the USS Silversides. They still start the original engines once or twice a year, which are diesel locomotive engines from trains retrofitted in 1942 to fit inside of a submarine. Okay, where were we? The Navy's aircraft carriers are named for presidents. The USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, is a good example. Wait, CVN-78, what does that stand for? CVN means Carrier Volplane Nuclear, and is a US Navy hull classification symbol for nuclear aircraft carriers. 78 is just the number they gave the Ford, I think. Someone will correct me in the comments, I'm sure. The US military also names enemy equipment for quick identification. During World War II, when Allied forces had trouble identifying the Japanese planes they were encountering, the military devised a short way to immediately identify classes of airplanes. For example, Japanese fighters were given male names such as Zeke, Tony, and Oscar. Bombers were named after women: Betty, Helen, Sally, and Peggy. From then on, Allied gunners could relay immediately what kind of plane they were up against. After the war, the US kept it up by giving NATO designations to Soviet equipment. After all, Russian Cyrillic is not as intuitive to an English speaker as the alphabet based on Latin. Officially created by the Air Standardization Coordinating Committee, ASCC, at NATO, the designations are words you've likely heard in the media recently, like the Su-57 Felon and the MiG-29 Fulcrum. It goes deeper. For Russian aircraft, a one-syllable name denotes a propeller plane. A two-syllable word denotes a jet. Fulcrum, that's a jet. The first letter of the plane's name describes its mission. Therefore, a Candid, two syllables and starts with a C, would be a jet cargo plane. A Fulcrum, two syllables and starts with an F, designates a nickname for a jet fighter. What about the Russian Kinzhal hypersonic missile I mentioned at the top of the video? Well, Kinzhal is actually the Russian name. The NATO designation is the Killjoy. But the media has been almost exclusively using the Russian name, myself included. Back in the US Army and Air Force, American aircraft also used the first letter designator to describe their mission. UH in UH-60 Black Hawk stands for utility helicopter. The AH in AH-64 Apache means attack helicopter. The US Air Force uses the Mission Design Series, MDS, to name aircraft. An F designates a fighter role like the F-22 Raptor, while a B represents a bomber role like the B-21 Raider. This also applies to cargo roles. The C-5 Galaxy is a good example. Sometimes the Army simply gives up and just makes an acronym the official name, like the NASAMS, the National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System, or the HIMARS, High Mobility Artillery Rocket System. ATACMS, Army Tactical Missile System, is another good example you might have seen recently. I love ATACMS. ATACMS reminds me of Steakums for some reason, and it's making me really hungry. Over in the Space Force, satellites are a free-for-all. Sometimes they're a mashup of the mission and something space-related, like the Navstar. And other times they're simply acronyms, like the SBIRS for Space-Based Infrared System. Occasionally, names are controversial. The Navy named an aircraft carrier for the late U.S. Senator John Stennis of Mississippi, despite his support of segregation. Regardless, the Department of Defense largely leaves the naming of weapon systems up to the respective branches. Because of this, some conventions make perfect sense, and others are downright confusing. The U.S. Coast Guard's only existing icebreaker on the Great Lakes is named after Mackinac, an island in the Straits that connect Lake Michigan to Lake Huron. Technically, and I'm always technical, remember, Lake Michigan and Lake Huron are one body of water. Makes sense to me. Others are head-scratching, like the Patriot missile, which would have been called the Black Widow if not for General Meade's distaste for insects. If regulations can be overruled by senior commanders, then what's the point of having regulations at all? U.S. military naming rules are more akin to recommendations than actual policies. The U.S. Navy's aviation names show no pattern or similarity between aircraft, like the Hornet, the now-retired Tomcat, or the now-retired Phantom. So we have an insect, a cat, and a ghost. None of those things have anything in common. In everyday use in the military, we would often use the name for the system that took the least amount of effort. For instance, we would say AWACS instead of E-3 Sentry, even though AWACS could describe a number of different aircraft. What the branch leaders call their equipment versus what the troops and the media call it are often three different things. It's actually amazing that anybody knows what we're talking about at any given moment. Still, I hope this peek behind the curtain is, if not helpful, at least entertaining. The next time you hear about some new weapon system sent to Ukraine, you may now have a better understanding of what the system's role is. Or maybe I've only made things worse. At the end of the day, who cares what its name is as long as it gets the job done and kicks Ukraine's invaders back to Russia. That's it for today. Subscribe, friends, if you get the opportunity, if you like what you see, because it really does make a big difference on my end. And I'm very loyal to my subscribers. You're in my family now. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Slava Ukraini.